Well, since we have talking about socialism, I guess we should switch over into talking about the apocalypse. Apocalypse
Oh,
Now.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, the apocalypse now. For those of you unaware, well, we've been doing these movie reviews, and we just finished our Kubrick month, and so we're doing like a little bit of we're in a transitional month with like no real like theme. Um, so this month it's just kind of like
Hodgepodge.
up, yeah, up in the air, kind of whatever we think of. But we decided to do Apocalypse Now. Um, those of you who don't know, it was a when was this movie made? Like in the 70s,
1979.
1979. So okay, so in the late 70s. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola of Godfather fame. And it's a story about this army captain who is tasked with with assassinating a a very well respected, highly decorated colonel. Who had who was destined for greater things than the army. And the movie is kind of like a descent into madness for the main character, who is played by Martin Sheen. And he's tasked with this mission to go kill him. And as he goes, as he's going up, as he's traveling and going along the river within Vietnam, they have like these different kind of run-ins, and like it's slowly like eroding uh, their humanity. And they're it's slowly eroding their humanity. And it culminates at the end where they finally meet up with this colonel, and Martin Sheen's character ultimately takes him out. But the Colonel Kurtz, he kind of almost welcomes it, because he realizes what he's become. He realizes the darkness that has entered his heart and stripped him of his humanity, and he almost kind of welcomes his own death. And so I guess we'll go into our review now.
Kind of considering that, with the way you ended that too, where he embraces that darkness, is when we first start the movie, we see him in that hotel room where he has kind of already like been kind of darkness has already kind of embraced him.
Right.
He's gone crazy, and he's normal life it makes him crazy.
Right.
And
because prior to this mission of killing Colonel Kurtz, he was part of another mission which ended up having him kill 4 suspected Vietnamese spies. And so I think and then he was like and like I think he kind of had like had like a promising career, but then since this happened, like his career has kind of stalled, or been you know or his career has been kneecapped. And so he's like gone into like this kind of spiral, like he drinks and and has like these kind of hallucinations.
So you kind of wonder if like that madness, that darkness was already in him, and going after going over after that colonel and listening to his words, it's like he's kind of seeing a mirror version of himself almost. And as we as we go through the film, you kind of see and the Vietnam War was kind of known as one of, and this happens in any sort of war, but the Vietnam War especially is notorious for being one where a lot of people went kind of crazy, and a lot of bad things happened, and it caused whether you call it we saw in like Past the Glory, they called it shell shock, or in I forget what they call it for the Vietnam War, but like now it's kind of known as PTSD, where you get just people who suffer through a lot of trauma and don't know what to do with it. And the Vietnam War is definitely notorious for bringing that along. And as Andy was saying, kind of as you progress through the movie, through all the little side missions that they ended up going through, the people, the Martin Sheen and the rest of the characters that he was with seemed to get crazier and crazier as the as the movie went on.
Right. Yeah. It's yeah. That's yeah. This entire movie is like a slow descent into like madness, and I think one of the first kind of the first step I think was when they ran into the cavalry colonel.
Yeah, played by Robert Duvall.
Played by Robert Duvall, and in the movie, Martin Sheen is like narrating, and he described him as one of those officers where he knew like nothing bad was gonna happen to him.
Yeah,
Yeah, despite being like on the front lines and being part of the action, like he just kind of walked around and had this kind of attitude, was like nothing was gonna harm him, and he actually, and then like yeah, and then Robert Duvall's Colonel character actually stormed or attacked a Viet Cong kind of stronghold just to get access to their beach for the waves, because
yep.
he was a surfing enthusiast, and so he learns,
Yeah, yeah.
he learns that Martin Sheen's Captain Miller it has to go has to go through there to continue his mission. And he's like, well, hell yeah, we're gonna. He's like, and then like when he hears from another soldier, he's like, oh yeah, I hear there's like 6 foot breaks. He's like, 6 foot breaks. He's like, oh, then for sure we're gonna take that place. And then he goes, he then rallies his men. He's like, all right, at dawn we're gonna go and take that beach. And then
Well, and then the other crazy thing that was happening is like where that soldier who was talking about the waves and stuff. It's once they like landed on the beach, he like they had surfboards, and so it's like once the fighting started, it's like, well, you can either fight or you can surf on that fucking ocean. It's, and so they went surfing. It's like, what is going on?
yeah, it was pretty great. But it was interesting because I guess I'm jumping around here a bit, but towards the end, Colonel Kurtz, he talks about like terror, and
Yeah,
I think there are little elements, of that terror, of the idea of terror in like that throughout this movie. There's like the build up to the attack on the Viet Cong stronghold. You know, Robert Duvall's character, he plays Wagner's Flight of the Valkyries, and
yeah.
he says, oh yeah, we start playing it like a mile out, to put the real like to put the fear of God into them. And it's like that's just like another form of that's just another I guess that's just another facet of terror.
Yeah, and that's also one of our favorite things of that Wagner song is
Right.
being played in those type of situations has become it's been used in several films ever since.
Right, like the ominous, that's like the Flight of the Valkyries. That's used, that's been used and parodied in like every other movie. When like this overwhelming force, usually from above, because air cav, they are made up of helicopters, and so yeah, like whenever it's been parodied, there's like using like toy helicopters, like they start playing, Flight of the Valkyries and
Yep.
so yeah, that's your your cultural touchstone of the week.
Yep. There's one other scene too that gets used quite a bit as well. Towards the end of Martin Sheen's character when he comes up out of the water,
Right. Yeah, kind of
that's
like
been used
commando
in scenes
style,
like
and he has like the
yeah.
green and black paint on his face, and then he
Yep.
goes in and he starts like splitting throats of sentries, and he finally makes his way to Colonel Kurtz and executes him, which I think it's kind the imagery was kind of interesting because to parallel that scene, like the natives that Colonel Kurtz had ingratiated himself into, they were having a ceremony where they were going to sacrifice this water buffalo, and there was this kind of
That was
oscillation.
really horrific, by the way.
Yeah, well, I didn't think they were gonna actually show yeah, they actually showed the water buffalo being hacked. Like you could see the cut into that water buffalo's neck, and the constant hacking, but then they kind of oscillated between those two killings, and kind of um,
And then
linking
Marlon
them.
Brando, who is about the size of a water buffalo.
Yeah, Marlon. Yeah, again, yeah. The Colonel Kurtz character, the one that goes insane, um, is played by, of course, Marlon Brando. Again, from Godfather fame. If
Well,
not
it's
from, a ton of other movies.
right. Yeah, there was that. So we had the Flight of the Valkyries with the helicopters. We had Martin Sheen coming up out of the water is one of those iconic scenes that's been parodied and used. Same thing with when they are coming into the on the boat across the river when they're coming into that encampment with all the natives and people that have been lured in by Captain Kurtz. They're all lined up against the shore.
Mm-hmm.
That's another one of those iconic scenes.
Right. Yeah. Just like the decapitated or the strung up. Yeah. Just like that kind of you wanna scare the bejesus out of somebody. You line some corpses or chopped off heads along a riverbank, and
Yep.
I think that'd be the best deterrent against solicitors as well.
I'd be like, yep, you know what? We're gonna get the fuck out of here.
Right. Yeah, but oh, I totally forgot that Harrison Ford was in this movie too.
Yeah, well, okay. That I was gonna say some of the interesting cameos in the movie. Yeah, you had Harrison Ford.
Hmm.
Um, Lawrence Fishburne was in the movie.
He was?
Yeah, he was. Lawrence Fishburne was the Mr. Clean Miller.
Wait, no way, really?
Yeah,
He was so skinny.
yeah. Okay, well, here's the thing about I was reading up. So he was at the filming of this film. He was actually 14 years old,
Really?
and yeah, because filming began in '76. He was 14, and he had lied about his age to get the role because he was supposed to be 17 or 18.
Right, you have to be an adult.
Yeah, but he wasn't. He was 14, but he lied about his age to get the role.
Wow.
And I was like, once I didn't. I was like, man, that guy looks so familiar, but I couldn't place it. And then when I went back and looked at the casting,
Hmm.
and I was like, get the fuck out of here. That was Lawrence Fishburne.
Wow. Yeah, I
And once
pulled
I
it up
looked at it,
right
it's like,
now,
yeah,
and
it definitely is.
wow. Wow.
Yeah, that was Lawrence Fishburne.
Incredible.
Then you had like Dennis Hopper,
Of course, Dennis Hopper. Yeah, he was
was
like
the crazed hippie photojournalist,
right.
a role he was born to play, baby.
Oh yeah. I mean, after Easy Rider, after Easy Rider, what do you follow that up with?
Right, exactly. Who else was it Francis Ford Coppola played the TV news director at the beginning of the
Oh yeah, at the
film?
beginning where like when they initially meet Robert Duvall's character, it's just like keep moving,
Right.
don't mind the
Don't look
camera,
at the
just keep
camera.
moving.
Yeah, that was him. Yeah, you had Robert Duvall, as Godfather,
Godfather alum.
fame. I'm trying to think of who else was. Oh, and then it was uncredited, but R. Lee Ermey was in this film too. He
Yeah,
was the
he was the
helicopter
pilot. Yeah, he was the pilot.
who later came to fame in Full Metal Jacket.
Right. Yeah, as Sergeant Hartman.
Yeah. So there's a lot of like great cameos in the film too.
Mm-hmm.
Something that okay, the film was very weird. And I think that was what Coppola was going for, was something that was kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
You have you're always kind of like wondering with Martin Sheen's character, who was Captain Willard. That was his name, and he's on this super top secret assassination attempt
Mm-hmm.
of Commander Kurtz's. He's gone rogue, so he's going to be assassinated. And he's already, like I said, we said it. He's already mad at the beginning of the film, and it's, I think he hit a lot of times, especially what I've heard from a lot of Vietnam veterans, is that yeah, going back to something that's simple or normal life is very difficult, especially if you've been in a very difficult war situation,
Mm-hmm.
which Captain Willard had been. He'd been through a lot of tough situations, and we see him, he's on leave, or he's kind of on his way out of Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
and he's kind of going crazy because he's not actually, he's not doing anything. He doesn't know how to cope with all that he's done, and he's, almost praying. It's like, I want to go back into the fight, to do something, because he feels like that's all he's worth of doing.
Right.
And so when he finally gets that mission, where it kind of takes him a second to regain his composure, but then throughout most of the film, he seems quite normal, actually. Nothing. He's kind of like, okay, I have a mission. I know what I'm going after.
Mm-hmm.
And of all the group that he's with, he seems to be the most in control outside of the chief of the boat that he's on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so they're going through, and even when they go into the some of those other bases that the chief has, like, missions that he's trying to complete too, and those other bases that they run into where they've lost their commanding officer or anything, they've kind of lost their minds as well.
Right. Yeah.
He seems to be the only one that's like has his composure.
Right. He still maintains discipline even in the face of chaos.
Right. Exactly.
And then he offers and he gives the men like the chief gives purpose and direction to the men that are under him, because like he has a steady and resolved disposition to himself.
Yeah, and if throughout the time that they're traveling to that area, he's getting to know Commander Kurtz, and how he's kind of
Miller.
right, and he's learning about his mindset and like all the information that's been given to him, how he's become a crazy person, he's a danger to those around him, and Then he finds out that there's other people that have been lured in by him and have turned them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And as I think like what may have turned him kind of somewhat to he obviously ends up killing him, but at the same time, I think he he's also enticed by his words as well, because he's not a crazy person per se. He just has kind of like a lot of he just has a super negative view on the world, and it's like, he's wanting this is Commander Kurtz, where he's trying to kind of create his own army, and kind of unite both, like the Viet Cong, and anyone that wants to come and listen to his message.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, and whereas like he's enticed by that, because it's like, well, it's kind of I can live in this insanity yet, but there's also purpose to the insanity. Whereas when it came to the actual war itself, he felt like there was no, it was just insanity for the sake of insanity. There wasn't a whole lot of purpose to it.
Right. And I think Captain Miller, Martin Sheen's character, he starts because he in like the dossier that they gave him, with information about Colonel Kurtz. There are some like reports that he wrote about, like, oh, we could, we're putting too much into it. We could achieve our objectives with half the amount of men if we cut these certain like luxury items out. I think he cites like rock and roll and beer as one of the vices that that will make soldiers like complacent, because they have like these creature comforts that remind them of home, so that then they will, and then in turn, like lose focus and no longer be effective.
Right.
And so yeah, and to the point that you brought up about how how does one, because Colonel Kurtz was a very impressive person, because he was in the dossier he said it was like third generation West Point. Um, he was the first person over the age of 35 to join the special forces and also become a Green Beret. And also go to like jump school, and just do all these impressive things. And so you know uh, Captain Miller, he was definitely up against a very impressive person.
Yeah.
And so maybe he thought, maybe in his mind, his only way of defeating Colonel Kurtz is to like is to in in essence become like Colonel Kurtz, and embrace the madness, embrace the darkness, embrace the terror, as it were.
Yeah, and that's kind of like what we're left with is uh, Kurtz's last words to Miller as he was killing him was, the horror, the horror.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of really the theme of the entire film, is all we're kind of introduced to is, the horror.
Right. And there's different types of horror. There's the horror of one's personal actions, and there's the horror of the horrors of following orders. There's the horror of kind of like aimlessness, as demonstrated by Captain Miller in the opening scene, where he's just like kind of going nuts. So
Yeah.
yeah, again, I think and there's like psychological horror, as demonstrated by Robert Duvall's character of using music to instill horror or terror into the enemy. So yeah, horror is deeply woven within this movie.
Hey, a second film where music has been the horror, like in was it Clockwork Orange, where yeah,
Oh, that's
like,
right. Yeah.
yeah, that was a movie where music was turned into horror.
Right.
The Dog Man.
Yes. All right.
um,
So, any other thoughts?
it's this is a one of those movies where I never felt comfortable watching the movie, and that was by design, I assume. The the film was always meant to be uncomfortable, and when it comes to the this is so fresh after the end of the Vietnam War that I think that was Coppola's intention, was to show the kind of the the horror of war, quote unquote the horror. And so I think it was always meant to be very uncomfortable, and you definitely get that throughout the whole movie, and all the characters were in their own way kind of played a part in that horror. We see Martin Captain Willard, who he's already on the descent of madness to begin with, and hell, in real life, Martin Sheen kind of went insane during the filming of the film. He ended up having a massive heart. I don't know if it was like a massive heart attack, almost died. But even before that happened, he had kind of gone off the deep end mentally, filming this movie during the filming of the film. But then even though the other characters were like Robert Duvall, Captain Kilgore, he instead of
Kilgore, that
letting
was
the horror
interesting. Yeah, Robert Duvall's character.
instead of letting the horror embrace him, he brought the horror.
Right.
And you had Marlon Brando, Commander Kurtz. He kind of became a horror of himself. He wanted to be the horror.
Mhm.
And it's just everyone kind of that was the theme of the film, and how there was characters either that were in that they've either allowed the horror to come inside of them. You saw that in the people that like the Playboy Playmates. We watched the Redux version, by the way. So
Yeah.
if you've only watched the theatrical release, some of the things we
Oh,
might
that's
say
right.
might
Yes. Yeah. Because like one of the playmates, she was describing like kind of like a casting couch situation, and just like
right. And
the horror of that. And so
while like she was discussing that while next to a dead body inside of a cabinet or whatever.
right. Yeah.
So you had that situation. You had the soldiers that had lost their commanding officer on their trip that had completely descended into madness.
Mm-hmm.
You had Commander Kilgore, who he similar to he was providing horror. You had Commander Kurtz, who was horror, and like people feared him, and so every character that was in this film kind of was embraced that theme of the horror of war in various ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of like what we're, in my opinion, that's kind of like what the movie was about. And it was interesting for sure. I've never really sat down and really analyzed the film, or sat down and watched it seriously. I've seen it before, but I never really like sat down and quote unquote watched it for real. And so I'm kind of coming into this fresh almost in a way.
Mm. Yep. All right. So I guess that's all we have to say about that. Um,
What are your thoughts, Andy? Did you have anything else to add?
no, I mean, but I think okay. The only thing I will add, I think Colonel Kurtz was the only one fully aware of his situation, and like
Yeah, you know what?
he
That's
realized that like he can never re-enter society again, and he like and you know, I think in Captain Miller's narration, he was like saying like, he knows why I'm here, and I think a part of him welcomes it. Um, and I think yeah, it just and that goes to show, and just like his at the end when like his almost willingness to die. I mean, it didn't look like he was he was putting up that much of a fight. I mean, if anything, like if he put up a arm, I would guess it was more of an instinctual thing. But yeah, I think he was prepared to die because he realized that there was no place for him in the civilized world, and and there was no use for him after that because they turned him. Uh, the army had made him into a weapon of war, and there's nothing else that you can be used. It's not like you can go, you can be used to as a weapon of war, and then go and run your kids carpool, or
right.
sit on the PTA. Is just like and I think he was ready to die because he knew like the darkness and like the horde that he had become could not be allowed to abide.
In a way, he was only the sane he was the last sane person left.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. That's a good way of putting it.
Good point.
All right. So on a scale of 1 to 5, what would you give Apocalypse Now?
I'm gonna go with a 4 on this one.
A 4. Okay.
Yeah, I give it a 4A because yeah, it there was a theme throughout the whole movie. You know, obviously it's weird,
Mm-hmm.
but the theme was pretty consistent throughout. All the characters kind of embraced that theme,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I like the dialogue. I like the cinematography was good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, overall it was a good movie.
Yeah, I give it a 4 as well. Just on based on the things that you said as well. Um, yeah, it's one of those movies where you like have you kind of have to mentally prepare yourself because you are gonna see some really weird shit, and but I think you know but I think ultimately it's saying it's saying a lot, and I think it's something that's worth saying,
Yeah,
and it's something that's worth listening to and to consider. So
yeah,
yeah,
definitely. I would agree with that. Yeah, it's a good movie to go and watch.
yeah. Just yeah, I wouldn't recommend it as a first date movie, but
No, God, no. Yeah,
I
that's
mean, unless the girl's like really into like those psychological, deep philosophical kind of you know movies,
yeah.
then
If you really like psychological thrillers, then this is the movie for you.
yeah.